Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Good morning to all of those that are tuned in. So basically, this presentation is just going over, you know, basically how to interpret a funding opportunity announcement. And so, or a federal funding opportunity announcement. In particular, because all of the different agencies have their own terminologies, but for the most part, at the core, everything's pretty similar, but it still can get confusing sometimes, just differentiating how different agencies post solicitations and things like that. So this presentation is just to give you an idea and an overview of how to better understand them. So we'll start off with the key elements of a funding opportunity. Basically, this is just things that you want to look for. Specifically, the program purpose and goals, which again, every agency is different in how they word this, but this is basically like the synopsis or the summary of what the program announcement is. And so basically, you want to look at your program purpose and the goals so you can identify exactly what it is that the sponsor is looking for. And also to make sure that what you're proposing fits within the scope of their funding initiative. And so also the catalog of federal domestic assistance number, this is basically going to be on any federal opportunity that you look at. Because it's basically how the government or the federal agencies identify the type of category that their programs fall under. So you will always see a CFDA number. And then you also definitely want to check the you definitely want to check the eligibility requirements to make sure that you qualify to even submit a proposal or an application. So yeah, be sure that you pay close attention to this, because a lot of times the last thing you would want to happen is that you go and do all of the work for a proposal just to find out that you don't actually qualify for it. And so this is where you'll see, if it's being granted solely to individuals, which is the person themselves, or if it's only granted to the organization, which would be basically, say for instance, you are applying for a federal award, which 9 times out of 10, this is usually how it works. It will be awarded to the organization or the institution, which would basically be U of H submitting on your behalf. So that's what they mean by that. And then you also want to know the type of award that it is. Is it a grant? Is it a cooperative agreement? Is it a contract? Thing that you definitely want to pay attention to that, because some people, and again, you'd be surprised how many people kind of like gloss over that part and don't really pay attention, and they're not really sure of what type of award they're actually applying for. So be mindful of that. And you also want to pay attention to the due date for the grant application. This is really important, obviously, but there's certain parts of an application where, like, so say the organization wants you to submit a letter of interest first prior to submitting the full proposal, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail later on. But it's important to pay attention to this because LOI due dates differ from the actual application due date. So I know a lot of times, like in some of the subscription service grant databases, say Pivot, for instance, like if you click on the opportunity, it'll tell you that the due date is like, say, today, October 5th. But when you go and click on the actual website of the sponsoring agency and dig a little deeper, you'll see that, yes, the due date for the application would be today, but they didn't actually tell you that the LOI was due like a month prior to that. So just be really careful when you're looking at due dates, especially in certain databases, because they have a bad habit of publishing the application due date, but not actually telling you all of the other pertinent information that you need to know regarding letters of intent or pre-proposals. So, and again, we'll dig a little deeper into that later on. You also want to pay attention to the funding opportunity number. This is going to be important because it's most likely going to need to be referenced on your application. And also it'll be used as a reference when you're going through the proposal submission process on our end internally at the institution. And then also you want to make note of the reporting requirements. This isn't something that you'll necessarily need in the pre-award phase, but it'll definitely be a good resource in the post-award process. So you definitely want to be aware of everything that the sponsor requires with regard to progress reports, technical reports, financial status reports, and things of that nature. And then lastly, this is probably like the second most important part of an opportunity announcement is the review criteria, because the review criteria will actually aid you in writing your proposal. You'll use the review criteria to actually write out your titles and your subheadings, and this is very useful to the reviewer because it guides them to the information that they need to know. So it's very important that you, number one, address the stated review criteria in your proposal, but also use the review criteria to kind of pull your headers, or I'm sorry, not your headers, your titles for each section in your proposal, because it makes it that much easier for the reviewer, again, to find what they're looking for to assess your proposal. So this part, we're going to talk about the types of announcements, and this is the part where it gets a little confusing sometimes, because a parent announcement is not necessarily a program announcement, and vice versa. So it's a good idea to have a grasp on the differences between the type of announcement. So specifically, this is with regard to NIH. So your parent announcement is basically what allows applicants to submit, and it allows applicants to submit investigator-initiated applications for a specific activity code. And so basically, with your activity codes with NIH, that's like your R01s, your R21s, K12s, T32s, and things like that. The activity code specifies the type of grant under whatever program that you're applying for. But in this case with parent announcement, it's not necessarily program specific. Again, it's investigator initiated, where the investigator is pretty much proposing their own research, as long as it falls within, you know, the centers that are involved, or the institute and centers that are involved. And so a program announcement is issued by one or more institute and centers, and it highlights areas of scientific interest. And so when you're applying to a program announcement, that's basically, the institute or center has basically specified what they want you to apply for. And so whereas a parent announcement, it's not really specific. It's just kind of, if you have an idea for research, you can propose it you can apply to a parent announcement. So a request for application is basically a very well defined area of scientific interest. It's very specific. And if I'm not mistaken, those typically have single due dates. And again, we'll get into all of that a little bit later. But we'll go ahead and take a look at a parent announcement just so you guys can get an idea of, and I mean, they're not, when you look at them at first glance, a parent announcement and a program announcement don't really look all that different, but that's where digging into the details and really paying attention comes in handy. So So basically, this is our parent announcement. And if you scroll, you'll see all of the different institutes and centers involved, but you'll also see that it has the funding opportunity announcement number here. And it'll give you like any companion announcements that go with it in conjunction with the parent announcement. And then also you definitely want to pay attention to this little piece right here, because it'll have a parent RL1 clinical trial not allowed, RL1 clinical trial optional, or it'll have, I think the other one is clinical trial required. So yes, definitely pay attention to this piece right here. And so yeah, this is basically what your parent announcement will look like. And it gives you all the specific instructions related to it. It tells you the different types of application types allowed. Yeah, and see, it'll reiterate it again if a clinical trial is or isn't allowed. So, and then here's your eligibility, I can never say that word right. Your eligibility information is here. So yeah, going back to that first slide where I was telling you the specific things that you need to be looking for, this is one of those things. So yeah, so this is what your parent announcement looks like with NIH. So let's take a look at a program announcement. Oh, sorry. So this is a program announcement, and if you look closely at the opportunity title, it's a specific program that they're looking to receive applications for. Whereas with the parent announcement, it wasn't really specific. It just told you that it was a parent announcement and it's for an RL1. So this one is specifically for an RL1, but it's telling you specifically the purpose. So this is for research on chronic overlapping pain conditions. So again, that's pretty much how you can tell the difference between a parent and a program announcement. And it, like I said, if you look, they all are pretty similar. So it's really important that you pay attention to the details. And then also the letter of intent due dates. Letter of intent with NIH, it's my understanding they're not necessarily required. It's more for like management purposes. So yeah, but again, read the details. It'll tell you specifically what they're looking for. And so let's go to the next slide. So yeah, so your request for proposals is basically soliciting contract proposals, not grant proposals, but contract proposals. And so again, you'll be able to differentiate between those because they look slightly different than program and parent announcements. Again, that's why it's important to pay attention to the details. That's the thing about working in grants. I know specifically for me, you get really good at digging into details because missing even the smallest detail can completely mess up a proposal, or a small oversight can completely throw things off. So working in grants, because there's so much information and no agency is alike, no foundation or organization is the same as the last. And so you get really accustomed to being very detail oriented. So a notice is basically announcing policies and procedure changes to RFAs or PA announcements, requests for proposals, and other general information items. You definitely, if there's a notice in a funding opportunity announcement, please pay attention to it. Please take heed to it because it could be announcing a significant change that's that has a direct effect on the opportunity that you're looking into. So let's take a look at a notice. So here is a notice. As you can see, it's slightly different than a program announcement. It doesn't have due dates or anything like that. But it'll tell you all of the related announcements that are directly related to this specific notice. It'll tell you which institute or center it's been issued by, tell you the exact purpose so you can have a clearer understanding of why this notice is even being published. So yeah, definitely when you look at your, here, let me see if I can go back to, let's look at this program announcement and see if there's any relevant notices. Because usually the notices will show up in this section. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think this one. But yeah, usually if there's any, oh, here we are, related notices. So there's none for this one. But yeah, if there's any pertinent information that you need to know regarding any updates or anything like that to the program announcement or the parent announcement, the notice will show up in this section. So definitely don't dismiss it. Make sure you pay attention to it. And let's see. So for NSF, they have program announcements. Pretty, you know, like I said, some of the verbiage across agencies is pretty similar, but sometimes they can be slightly different. So a program announcement with NSF, which is National Science Foundation, refers to formal NSF publications that announce NSF programs. So you definitely want to pay attention to that. Now the program solicitation is the actual opportunity with all of the details specific to that opportunity. And the solicitation basically encourages the submission of proposals to specific program areas of interest to NSF. And it's more specific, again, it's more specific than the program announcement. Whereas with NIH, you have parent announcements and you have program announcements. But the program announcement was more specific than the parent announcement. So yeah, like I said, it's a lot of the information is similar, but it's slightly different. Every agency is slightly different. So dear colleague letters are basically intended to provide general information to the community about any existing policies or documents. It's used to clarify things like that. It also informs of upcoming opportunities or special competitions for supplements to existing awards. And so dear colleague letters are not always necessarily funding opportunities, but it's still, you should definitely pay attention to it. Let's take a look at one. So yeah, it's basically giving you information on convergence research and any initiatives that NSF is taking to promote convergence research, any possible funding opportunities that might come about in the future. Anything like that would be in the Dear Colleague letter. So, okay, so now we're going to get a little deeper into funding mechanisms. And these are the types of grant awards that you grant awards or programs that you can apply to the different federal agencies. Now, there's what, 26 federal granting agencies, I think. So it would take me way longer than the time allotted to cover all of the different funding mechanisms under each one. So for all intents and purposes of this presentation, I'm only covering the most commonly applied to agencies and the most commonly applied to programs within those agencies from my college, from College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. So basically your research grants with NIH, they support discrete specified research projects and they're generally 3 to 5 years. And so R01 is basically the activity code that NIH uses for their grant programs. And we most commonly apply for R01s and R21s. So R21s support exploratory and developmental research projects, and those are typically up to 2 years. Career Development Awards, for your K series, provide institutional training opportunities to trainees at the undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral levels. So NIH also has research training and fellowship, their research training and fellowships program, which are your T and your F series. Those provide institutional research training opportunities to trainees, again, at the undergraduate, graduate, and postdoctoral levels. I've only had experience with T32s, which we've had postdocs on those. And so they're a really great opportunity. They can be tedious on the back end, the administration part of it, but they're really, really good opportunities for students. And typically with those, the student wouldn't actually apply for it, just FYI, the student doesn't actually apply for those. The principal investigator, which would be a faculty member, actually applies for it, and then they hire students to be on the grant. So your program project center grants, which is your P series, these are typically large multi-project efforts that generally include a diverse array of research activities. I don't know off the top of my head if we have any of those, but that's something that I could dig a little deeper into. I don't really have much experience with P series, so yeah. And then there's also resource grants, which is just various series of programs from NIH. So digging deeper into NSF funding mechanisms, they don't necessarily have like activity codes or anything like that. It's pretty much just programs. So RAPID is rapid response research, and that's for projects having a severe urgency. I know, say for instance, like with Hurricane Harvey, there was a Dear Colleague letter basically informing people that they would be extending funding opportunities for rapid response research in relation to the Harvey hurricane disaster. So EAGER, which is basically early concept grants for exploratory research, which is basically used to support exploratory work in the early stages on untested research ideas or approaches that have big impact or potential to pretty much transform the field. And then you have RAISE, which is your research advanced by interdisciplinary science and engineering, supports bold interdisciplinary projects. And then GOLI is basically opportunities for academic liaison and industry. So it's basically giving academic institutions a chance to collaborate with partners in industry. And so then you have your research program, which it's pretty self-explanatory. And then they have the Ideas Lab funding mechanism, which basically supports development and implementation of creative and innovative project ideas. And then they also have a conference funding mechanism, which supports conferences in special areas of science and engineering. So it has to be within science and engineering field. And then, because if I'm not mistaken, we've applied to a couple of conference NSF grants. So, and then you have equipment, which supports specialized equipment. And I know there's another one under this equipment that's for like really big equipment purchases, but I think it has to be multiple collaborators on it to qualify. I'm not sure, I'll have to look into that. But again, equipment grants really aren't my area of expertise, because most of my expertise deals with research and people. So, but if I'm not mistaken, NSF has a grant that's specifically for like really major expensive purchases. And obviously the institution submits for the PI, but I think it has to be multiple collaborators on it, if I'm not mistaken. I'll check on that. And then they also have an international travel funding mechanism. This is specifically for US participation and international scientific and engineering meetings. So it will really come in handy, you know, if you're representing the U.S. At like an international meeting of investigators in the field. And then you have your facility center, which basically this is for those types of research projects that require the resources that only an academic research center could provide. These typically last up to, or can go up to 10 years, I believe. And then you have your fellowships, which is basically graduate research and postdoctoral fellowships with a focus on educational development, curriculum development, things of that nature. So NEH, I've talked a lot about NIH and NSF. NEH is National Endowment for Humanities. There's, if I had to describe it in terms of how technical NIH programs are versus NIH and NSF, obviously, it's a little bit more laid back than NSF and NIH. It's pretty, the instructions for their grant programs are pretty straightforward. So yeah, it's, I'm not saying that it's not as detailed, because it's pretty detailed, but it's like, again, it's pretty straightforward. So their website is not nearly as extensive as NSF and NIH for obvious reasons. So yeah, so the NEH has the Challenge Grants program, which is basically used to strengthen institutional and organizational capacity for work in the humanities. These typically can go for renovations, sharing of collections, archives, or investment in restricted short-term endowments. And so then you have digital humanities, which is growing in popularity. These basically offers grants that explore how to harness new technology for humanities research. And the projects typically study digital culture from a humanistic perspective. So with education programs, these support humanities education. Programs are typically aimed at program and curriculum development, as well as professional development for educators. Like, they have a lot of professional development series that they do in the summertime for K-12 educators, and for some higher ed. And then you have preservation and access, which funds projects that preserve and create intellectual access to collections and cultural heritage resources. So the public programs are also pretty popular. Public humanities projects, basically, that reach large and diverse public audiences. So it's not necessarily for research purposes. Typically, these types of proposal, or a proposal proposed under public programs initiative, typically has to involve some level of public engagement. So yeah, that, you know, think about like screenings for, you know, like a history documentary or things like that. So, and then obviously you have your research programs, which support scholars working on research projects that advance knowledge and understanding of the humanities, which this program obviously is pretty popular with faculty in my college. It can be individuals or collaborative teams. What you'll notice with NEH is a lot of their programs are awarded to individual versus organization. And I know in the with the humanities, a lot of our faculty tend to apply to the grant programs that are targeted to individuals, like the Public Scholar Program. And then there's another one for Hispanic serving institutions, so things like that. So we'll get into submission types with NIH. This is also very important because NIH typically establishes they establish due dates based on submission type as well as activity code. So it's very important that you pay close attention to the application type. So basically new, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's an initial request for support of a project that hasn't been funded. And then you have your renewals, which is an initial request for additional funding for a period subsequent to that provided by a current award. Revisions are also, again, initial requests for additional funds during a current project period to support new or additional activities not identified in the current award. And then lastly, we have resubmissions, which are basically unfunded applications that have been modified following an initial review and are subsequently resubmitted. So submission types with NSF. Basically, you have letter of interest. This is requested in advance of submission of a full proposal, and it's used mainly for management purposes so that they can, gauge the level of interest in a particular program, also so that they can gather the appropriate reviewers for the applications that are coming in. And so you also have a preliminary proposal, which is basically, again, it's requested in advance of a full proposal, but it's slightly different from a letter of interest because basically a preliminary proposal reduces the unnecessary effort for the proposer if the chance of success of the proposal is small. So it's basically a way to not waste anyone's time, whereas a letter of interest is just to gauge the level of participation that they anticipate for a specific program. So with a preliminary proposal, you can either get an invite or a not invited, no invite. Basically, if you're invited, the preliminary proposal is invited to, the preliminary proposer is invited to submit a full proposal. Only people who are invited are allowed to submit full proposals. Now, the difference between invite and no invite and encourage and discourage is with encourage, discourage, you're not necessarily disqualified from applying or rejected from applying. You can still submit, but it's basically the reviewer giving you their feedback. I don't think it's strong enough. The data is too preliminary. You might want to go back to the drawing board, kind of discouragement, or, I think, your proposal is strong. The ideas are strong. I would go ahead and submit. So again, if you get invite, not invite, that basically means either you can submit a full proposal or you can't. Encourage, discourage, basically, it doesn't mean that you can't submit. It's just giving you their feedback on whether or not if you should or shouldn't. And then obviously the full proposal is the full application in its entirety. So submission types for NIH. Again, it's not as detailed. It's pretty straightforward. Either you're submitting as an individual or it's an organization submitting. So yeah. And usually when they award to individuals, it doesn't go through the institution's central research office, unless it's like in the case of like a course release or a course buyout, then some of those details have to be worked out. But for the most part, it goes directly to the individual. Like the university doesn't handle the administration part of it at all. So application deadlines with NIH, they utilize standard application due dates. Like I was saying earlier, it's based on activity code and application type. And it's usually split into 3 cycles. However, one thing to note, requests for applications usually have single due dates. So just keep that in mind. And again, like I said, due dates are assigned based on activity code. So let's take a look at some NIH standard due dates. So here you can see you have the activity code, program description, and the cycle. Like I said, they have three cycles for applications. And you basically would, if you looked at your program announcement or your parent announcement and you know that you're applying for an RL1, it's going to be a new proposal you've never submitted before. So you would basically come down here, see RL1 new, and then you can choose which cycle you want to apply by. So NSF and NEH due dates vary. They don't really have standard due dates. I mean, one thing for sure with NEH, typically you can kind of anticipate when they'll start a new program, because usually right at the end of, or the close of an application date for one particular program, it'll tell you the forecasted date for the next due date. So, but to say that they have like standard due dates like NIH, not necessarily. The same thing with NSF, the due dates vary. So, but again, you can, through their Dear Colleague letters, and then just from experience in applying with them and being familiar with their grant cycles, you can kind of anticipate when an application or a proposal will be due. So here's some resources that I think would be helpful for you guys just to kind of get better acclimated to understanding and differentiating the different funding opportunity announcements out there. Again, there's 26 grant awarding agencies, and it would take a really long time to cover all of those. So again, I just kept it to the ones that we typically apply to. But this is the NSF Proposal Award Policies and Procedures, which is basically like the NSF Bible. You definitely want to become familiar with this. It is long. It's like 180 pages, but I highly recommend familiarizing yourself with this. It gives you a breakdown of the different programs, what the different programs entail, what the review criteria are. It gives you proposal preparation guidelines and, you know, tips and tricks for that. So yeah, definitely become familiar with this, because it will basically tell you everything you need to know about how NSF operates with regards to their grant programs. And so here, this is a list of all of the different NIH programs in their entirety. Again, there's quite a few, so it would take me a really long time to cover those in the time allocated. So, but yeah, it gives you a breakdown of every different activity code and the specifics for each activity code. So yeah, again, definitely familiarize yourself with this so you can get a better idea of what programs you'd be best suited for. And so this one, the grant terminology is pretty helpful. This one, it takes you to grants.gov's website, which basically grants.gov captures all of the different funding opportunities available from all federal granting agencies. So they're all in one bucket here with grants.gov. And so basically the terminology that you'll see here would be in reference to the things that you would see on the grants.gov website when you're looking for funding opportunities. So that's a very helpful resource. And then lastly, this one you definitely want to familiarize yourself with, because NIH, I feel like the whole world of NIH is nothing but acronyms. As if there aren't already a gazillion acronyms in grants in general. NIH has a complete set of acronyms. So yeah, you definitely want to familiarize yourself with these. They break the acronyms down by awarding offices, institutes, centers, and yeah, they give you the 2-letter codes for the organizations, which you definitely want to familiarize yourself with that, because these 2-letter codes show up in the funding opportunity announcement number. So yeah, this is just a really good resource to use so that you'll become better acclimated with the way NIH words things. So, and yeah, that pretty much is the end of the presentation. I hope you guys were able to learn something from it, and I hope that it was valuable for you guys. Does anyone have any questions?